Captain Park Ji-hoon's boots dragged against the metal floor as he stumbled into Orbital Station Theta's diner. The place looked as beaten down as he felt. Flickering lights cast strange shadows on cracked walls, and the air smelled like burnt coffee and engine oil. Half the tables were broken, held together with metal tape that had seen better days. Ji-hoon slumped into the only booth that didn't wobble when he sat down. The vinyl seat had more tears than a sad movie, but it was still better than sleeping in his cargo hold again. He pulled off his worn captain's hat and ran his fingers through messy black hair. 3 weeks. 3 long, dangerous weeks of dodging pirates and smugglers just to deliver medical supplies to some backwater colonies that couldn't pay him what the job was really worth. His stomach growled loud enough to wake the dead. When was the last time he'd eaten something that wasn't freeze-dried rations or stale protein bars? His credits were running lower than fuel in a leaky tank, but he needed real food, something hot, something that would remind him he was still human and not just another piece of space junk floating through the void. The diner was nearly empty. A few rough-looking traders sat at the counter, speaking in hushed voices about cargo runs and customs officials. In the corner, a maintenance worker in greasy coveralls stared into his coffee cup like it held the answers to life's problems. The whole place felt tired, just like everything else on this forgotten station at the edge of civilized space. A waitress approached his table, her blue skin marking her as Viridian. Most humans still felt weird around alien species, but Ji-hoon had been hauling cargo long enough to see all kinds. The Viridians were good people, honest workers who'd never cheat you on a deal. This one looked tired too, her large eyes showing. The kind of exhaustion that came from working double shifts just to make ends meet. "What can I get you, Captain?" she asked, her voice carrying that musical quality all Viridians had. She'd already spotted the worn patches on his jacket that marked him as a ship captain. Probably saw a dozen guys like him every day. Broke spacers trying to make an honest living in a galaxy that didn't care much about honest anything. Ji-hoon looked up at her, noting the genuine kindness in her expression. "Just need something hot," he said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Anything that'll warm me up from the inside out. Been eating cold rations for weeks and I'm starting to forget what real food tastes like." She smiled, the kind of smile that said she understood exactly what he meant. "I've got some stew that's been simmering all day. Nothing fancy, but it's hot and filling. Comes with fresh bread too if you want it." "Sounds perfect." Ji-hoon managed a tired grin. "And coffee. Strong coffee. The kind that can wake the dead and probably violate a few health codes. Coming right up." She turned toward the kitchen, her steps quick but careful on the worn floor. Ji-hoon leaned back in the booth and closed his eyes for a moment. The constant hum of the station's life support systems was oddly comforting. A reminder that he was somewhere safe, at least for now. No pirate ships on his sensors, no alarms blaring, no desperate radio calls from colonies under attack. Just him, a warm meal coming his way, and maybe a chance to sleep in an actual bed instead of his pilot's chair. The minutes ticked by slowly. He could hear the soft clatter of dishes from the kitchen, the low murmur of conversation from the other. Patrons, the distant sound of ships docking and departing. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, the kind of sounds that reminded him why he kept flying these dangerous routes instead of taking some safe corporate job planetside. But when footsteps approached his table again, something was different. The rhythm was wrong, unsteady. He opened, his eyes expecting to see his waitress carrying a steaming bowl of stew. Instead, she was supporting someone else, a figure that made Ji-hoon's breath catch in his throat and his tired brain struggle to process what he was seeing. The person leaning against the waitress was clearly not human, but unlike any alien species he'd encountered in all his years of space travel, the newcomer was tall and elegant, with skin that seemed to shimmer like polished silver. But that silver skin was covered in a layer of frost that shouldn't have been possible in the station's controlled environment. Her hair, the pale blue-white of winter sky, hung in icy strands around a face that was beautiful in an otherworldly way. She was shivering, violently, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Ice crystals clung to her strange clothing, and her breath came out in visible puffs despite the diner's warmth. This wasn't just someone who was cold. This was someone who was dying from it. The waitress looked at Jihoon with desperate eyes, and he knew his quiet meal had just become something much more complicated. Jihoon stared at the woman in the waitress's arms, his tired brain trying to make sense of what he was seeing. She was tall, maybe 6 feet, with a build that seemed almost too delicate for her height. But it wasn't her size that caught his attention. It was everything else. Her skin wasn't just silver-colored. It actually seemed to glow with a soft, inner light that pulsed weakly beneath a coating of ice crystals. The frost wasn't melting despite the diner's warmth. Instead, it seemed to be spreading, creeping up her neck and across her face like some kind of living thing. Her hair hung in frozen strands, each one catching the diner's flickering lights and throwing them back in tiny rainbows. "Captain," the waitress said, her voice tight with worry. "This is Nayeon. She came in about an hour ago, barely conscious. Her transport was destroyed 3 days ago by raiders out near the Helix Nebula." Jihoon stood up so fast his booth's table shook, sending his empty coffee cup rattling. The woman, Nayeon, lifted her head slightly at the sound. Her eyes were the most incredible thing about her. They were like looking into deep space itself, dark blue shot through with points of light that seemed to move and shift like distant stars. But those beautiful eyes were filled with pain and something that looked like acceptance. She was giving up. Jihoon had seen that look before on colonists who'd been stranded too long, on crews who'd run out of hope along with their supplies. "What's wrong with her?" Jihoon asked, though he was already moving around the table. Whatever was happening to this woman, it was bad. The frost on her skin was getting thicker even as he watched. "She's Kairathi," the waitress explained, struggling to keep Nayeon upright. "They're ice dwellers from the outer rim, but she's been away from proper cold too long, and now she's going into thermal shock. It's like hypothermia, but backwards. Her body is trying to freeze itself from the inside out." "That doesn't make sense," Jihoon said, but he was already pulling off his jacket. "If she needs cold, why is she getting worse?" "It's not natural cold she needs. It's the specific temperature and atmosphere of her homeworld. Without it, her body starts shutting down." The waitress's voice cracked. "I've seen it before. She's got maybe a few hours left." Nayeon tried to speak, her lips moving soundlessly. Ice crystals formed on her breath, tiny and perfect. When words finally came, they were in accented standard, spoken through chattering that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. "Please," she whispered, her voice musical despite her condition. Don't trouble yourself. I am already lost." Something inside Jihoon's chest twisted at those words. He'd heard a lot of people give up over the years, but there was something about the way she said it that hit him harder than usual. Maybe it was the dignity in her voice, or the way she was trying to spare them the burden of helping her. "Like hell you're lost," he said, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders. The material was thick and warm from his body heat, but she barely seemed to notice. "Come on, we're getting you somewhere safe." The waitress looked surprised. "Captain, you don't understand. She's not human. Her biology is completely different. Even if you wanted to help, there's nothing you can do." Jihoon was already sliding one arm under Nayeon's legs and the other behind her back. She weighed almost nothing, like holding a bundle of silk scarves, but her skin was so cold it burned to touch even through his clothes. "Maybe not," he said, lifting her easily. "But I've got a ship with a med bay and environmental controls. If she needs specific temperatures, I can give her that. Worth a try, right?" Nayeon's head fell against his shoulder, and he could feel the cold radiating from her body. It was like carrying a block of ice shaped like a person. But underneath that supernatural cold, he could sense something else. Strength, maybe, or just stubbornness. The same quality that had kept her alive this long when her body was trying to shut down. "You don't know me," she whispered against his shoulder. "Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" Jihoon headed for the diner's exit, the waitress hurrying ahead to open the door. "Because that's what people do," he said simply. At least that's what they should do. The corridor outside was warmer than the diner, but Nayeon shivered even harder in his arms. Her condition was getting worse by the minute. Whatever was happening to her body, being in normal temperatures, was speeding it up instead of helping. "My ship's not far," Jihoon told her, walking as quickly as he could without jostling her too much. "Just hang on a little longer. We'll figure this out." She looked up at him with those star-filled eyes, and for a moment, the pain in them was replaced by something else. Surprise, maybe, or hope. "Kirathi do not forget kindness," she said softly. "If I survive this, I will remember." "When you survive this," Jehun corrected, picking up his pace. "Not if, when." The lucky star wasn't much to look at from the outside, just another beat-up cargo hauler that had seen better decades. But inside, she was home. Jehun's boots clanged against the metal deck plates as he carried Nayeon through the airlock, her weight somehow feeling even lighter in the familiar gravity of his ship. "Computer environmental controls to maximum heat," he called out, his voice echoing in the narrow corridor. "And I mean maximum. Override safety protocols if you have to." The ship's AI responded with a cheerful beep that seemed completely out of place given the situation. Within seconds, Jehun could feel the temperature rising. The Lucky Star's heating system wasn't fancy, but it was reliable. It had kept him alive through more cold space emergencies than he cared to remember. He made his way to his quarters. The small cabin that served as bedroom, office, and emergency medical bay all rolled into one. The space was cramped but clean, with a narrow bunk built into one wall and storage compartments covering every available surface. He laid Nayeon down on the bunk, pulling his heaviest blankets over her shivering form. Even with the heat cranked up, ice crystals still clung to her silver skin. Whatever was happening to her body went deeper than simple cold. This was something biological, something that normal warmth couldn't fix. But it was a start. "Computer, what's the temperature in?" "Here?" he asked, checking the small medical scanner he kept mounted on the wall. "Current temperature is 42 degrees Celsius and rising, Captain Park. Warning: prolonged exposure to these temperatures may cause heat exhaustion in humans." Jehun was already sweating, but Nayeon was still shivering. "Keep it climbing." "I'll deal with the heat." He stripped off his outer shirt, leaving just a thin undershirt, and headed for the tiny galley. His emergency rations weren't gourmet, but they were designed to provide quick nutrition and warmth. He pulled out a packet of vegetable soup, the kind that could be heated in less than 2 minutes, and actually tasted like food instead of cardboard. The galley's microheater worked its magic, filling the small space with the smell of herbs and artificial chicken flavoring. It wasn't much, but it was hot and it was real food. While the soup heated, Jehun grabbed a thermal mug and filled it with the hottest water the ship's systems could produce. Back in his quarters, the temperature had climbed to nearly 50 degrees. Jehun felt like he was working in a furnace, sweat dripping from his forehead. But Nayeon's shivering had finally started to slow down. "Hey," he said softly, sitting on the edge of the bunk. "I've got some soup. Think you can manage a few sips?" She opened those incredible star-filled eyes and looked at him with something that might have been surprise. "You are still here," she whispered, her voice less chattery now but still weak. "Where else would I be?" Jehun helped her sit up, supporting her back with one arm, while he held the mug with the other. "Come on, just a little bit. Your body needs fuel." The first sip made her gasp, steam rising from the mug in the superheated air of the cabin, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she took another sip, then another. With each swallow, some color seemed to return to her silver skin. The frost was finally starting to melt, leaving her features sharp and clear. "Better?" Jehun asked. She nodded, accepting the mug with hands that were still shaking but no longer looked like they were made of ice. "I do not understand," she said, her accent making the words sound musical even in their confusion. "Why are you helping me? Your species and mine, we have never been allies." Jehun shrugged, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we should be." As she continued to drink the soup, her voice grew stronger. The chattering stopped, replaced by something smoother, more controlled. "My name is Nayeon of the Kirathi. I am a data courier for my people's colonial fleet." "Data courier?" Jehun asked. "What kind of data?" "Planetary surveys," she said, her eyes growing distant. "My people, we have been searching for a new home for 3 generations. Our original world is dying, the ice that sustains us melting away due to solar changes. We need worlds with specific atmospheric conditions, specific temperatures, worlds where we can survive." She paused to take another sip, and Ji-hoon could see strength returning to her movements. Whatever biological crisis had been happening to her body, the heat and nutrition were helping. I was carrying survey data on 17 potential worlds, she continued. Places where my people could build new colonies, places where we wouldn't have to live in artificial environments or climate suits. 3 days ago, pirates attacked my transport. They destroyed my ship, killed my escort, but I managed to escape in a life pod with the data intact. That's why they're hunting you, Ji-hoon realized. Not just for revenge, but for what you're carrying. Nayeon nodded grimly. Information like this is worth millions of credits on the black market. There are species who would pay anything for coordinates to habitable worlds. The pirates know I have it, and they will not stop until they find me. The soup was half gone now, and the deadly pallor had left her skin completely. She was still pale by human standards, but her silver coloring had a healthy glow to it now. Like moonlight on water. How many people are we talking about? Ji-hoon asked. Your colonial fleet, I mean. 47,000 souls, she said quietly. Men, women, children, all of them depending on the data I carry, all of them waiting for news of a new home. Her voice broke slightly. If I fail, if the pirates get this information and sell it to the highest bidder, my people will have nowhere to go. We will be refugees forever, begging for scraps of frozen worlds that other species don't want. Ji-hoon stood up, pacing the small cabin despite the oppressive heat. So, we don't let that happen, we. Nayeon looked at him with surprise. Captain Park, you have already done more than enough. You have saved my life, but this is not your fight. Maybe it should be, Ji-hoon said, turning to face her. Besides, you said those pirates are still hunting you. That makes it my fight. Now whether I want it or not. The next morning, Ji-hoon woke up drenched in sweat on the floor of his own quarters. He'd given Nayeon his bunk and tried to sleep on the deck, but the cabin was still heated to temperatures that would make a desert planet feel cool. The environmental controls showed 55 degrees and climbing. Any normal human would have. Passed out from heat exhaustion by now, but when he looked at Nayeon, he knew it had been worth it. Her silver skin glowed with healthy light. No trace of the deadly frost that had been consuming her. She was sitting up in the bunk, looking out the small porthole at the stars beyond. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked truly alive. Good. Morning, Captain Park, she said, turning to smile at him. Her voice was clear now, musical in a way that reminded him of wind through crystal caves. I believe I owe you my life. Ji-hoon struggled to his feet, his clothes sticking to his skin. Just Ji-hoon is fine, and you don't owe me anything. Stumbled toward the galley, desperate for cold water. How are you feeling? Strong enough to leave, she said quietly. Strong enough to stop being a burden to you. That stopped him in his tracks. He turned around, water bottle halfway to his lips. Is that what you think you are, a burden? She looked down at her hands, those elegant fingers that seemed too delicate to belong to someone who'd survived 3 days in a life pod. My people have a saying. The ice that melts on another's fire brings only trouble. I have brought danger to your ship, to your life. It would be better if I left. Ji-hoon set down the water bottle and walked back over to her. Even in the extreme heat, being near her felt like standing next to an open refrigerator. Her body temperature was still far below human normal, but for her species it was healthy. Tell me about your people, he said, settling down on the floor near the bunk. Tell me about this exodus you mentioned. She looked surprised by the request. Why would you want to know? Because I'm curious, and because we've got time while my ship's computer plots a safe course out of this sector. He leaned back against the wall, ignoring the way the hot metal burned through his shirt. Besides, I've never met a Karathi before. Most humans haven't. For a moment, she just stared at him. Then slowly she began to speak. Our homeworld was called Thursol, she said, her voice taking on the rhythm of someone telling an old, familiar story. It was a world of eternal winter, with ice cities that stretched deep beneath frozen seas. We built our civilization in harmony with the cold, learning to find beauty and life in what other species saw as death. As she talked, Ji-hoon found himself drawn into her words. She painted pictures with her voice, describing crystal spires that sang in the wind, gardens of ice flowers that bloomed in patterns of impossible beauty, children who played games on frozen lakes that stretched to the horizon. But then our sun began to change, she continued, and sadness crept into her voice. It grew hotter, more unstable. The ice began to melt. Our cities flooded. Our gardens died. Our people started getting sick from the rising temperatures. How long ago was this? Jihoon asked. 3 generations. My grandmother was young when the exodus began. 47,000 of us loaded onto colony ships, carrying everything we could save from our dying world. We've been searching ever since, looking for a place where we can build new ice cities, where our children can grow up knowing the songs of Crystal Wind. Jihoon watched her face as she spoke. There was pain there, the kind that came from carrying the weight of an entire people's hopes. But there was also determination, a fierce refusal to give up that reminded him of his own stubborn streak. That's why the data you're carrying is so important, he said. She nodded. 17 worlds with the right conditions. 17 chances for my people to have a home again, instead of living in cramped ships, always moving, always searching. Her hands clenched into fists. I will not let pirates sell our future to the highest bidder. You won't have to, Jihoon said. We'll figure out a way to get you and that data safely to your people. She stared at him for a long moment. I do not understand you, Jihoon of the humans. My people, we have always been taught that your species is young and chaotic, violent, interested only in profit and expansion. But you, she shook her head, you saved a stranger's life without asking for payment. You are suffering in this heat to keep me healthy. You offer to help with dangers that are not your own. Jihoon felt uncomfortable under her intense gaze. It's just the right thing to do. Is it? She asked. When Kirathi encounter other species in distress, we calculate the cost versus benefit. We help if it serves our interests, or if we have resources to spare. But you acted without thought, without hesitation. You gave aid simply because it was needed. Maybe that's the difference between your people and mine, Jihoon said. We're too stupid to think things through first. She actually laughed at that, a sound like ice bells ringing. Perhaps, but perhaps there is wisdom in such stupidity. Over the next 2 days, as his ship traveled through the safer trade routes, Jihoon learned more about Neon and her people. She told him about Kirathi art, which involved carving patterns in ice that would shift and change as temperatures fluctuated. She described their music, created by wind passing through carefully shaped crystals. She explained their philosophy, which focused on finding balance between preservation and change. In return, Jihoon shared stories of human space exploration, of colonies built in impossible places through sheer determination. He told her about Earth, about oceans of liquid water and forests that changed color with the seasons. He described human music, chaotic and emotional in ways that fascinated her. Your species finds beauty in disorder, she observed one evening as they shared a meal in the superheated cabin. Kirathi seek perfection through precise patterns, yet both approaches create something worthy. Different doesn't have to mean wrong, Jihoon said. She smiled at that. No, it does not. But on the 3rd day, as they approached the edge of the neutral zone, she brought up leaving again. You have done enough, she said firmly. More than enough. I am strong now, and I can find my own way from here. You should return to your normal life, your normal cargo runs. Forget about the strange alien woman who brought danger to your ship. Jihoon was checking the navigation console when she said it, but he turned around to face her. And what if I don't want to forget? What if I want to see this through? The pirates are still out there, she said. They have better ships, better weapons. If they find us together, they will kill you without hesitation. Let me worry about that? Jihoon, please. She stood up, moving closer to him. Even with the cabin's heat, she was still cool to the touch. I could not bear it if something happened. To you because of me. He looked into those star-filled eyes and saw something there he hadn't noticed before. Fear, yes, but not for herself. For him. Too bad, he said, because I'm not letting you face this alone. Jihoon was in the middle of explaining how human coffee was different from the crystallized stimulants the Kirathi used when every alarm on his ship started screaming at once. The peaceful atmosphere of the past few days shattered like glass, hitting concrete. He dove for the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls as displays lit up with information he didn't want to see. 3 contacts on long-range sensors, moving fast and coming straight for them. The computer was already analyzing their signatures, and what it found made his blood run cold. Raider-class assault ships, he muttered, his fingers dancing across. The sensor controls. Military-grade engines, heavy weapons. He looked back at Nayon, who had gone very still in her chair. "I'm guessing these are your friends from 3 days ago." She moved to look over his shoulder at the display, her silver skin seeming to lose some of its glow. "The lead ship. Yes, that's the Blade Runner. Captain Vex commands it. He's the one who destroyed my transport." "Well, he's found us." Ji-hoon was already plotting escape routes, but the numbers weren't good. The raiders were faster, better armed, and had him boxed in between their 3 ships. "How the hell did they track us? I've been running dark emissions, staying off the main trade routes." Nayon's face went pale. "The data crystal," she whispered, pulling a small glowing device from her pocket. "It has a quantum signature that can be tracked across star systems. I thought the range was limited, but these guys have better equipment than you expected." Ji-hoon felt his stomach drop as he looked at the tactical display. The raiders had spread out in a perfect intercept pattern. Even if the lucky star had been twice as fast, there was no way out. "How long before they're in weapons range?" 12 minutes, the ship's computer announced cheerfully. "Incoming transmission." "Put it through," Ji-hoon said, though every instinct told him he didn't want to hear what these people had to say. The main screen flickered to life, showing a face that looked like it had been carved from old leather and bad intentions. "Captain." Vex was human, but the kind that made other humans ashamed of their species. Scars crisscrossed his face, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone who'd killed for money so many times he'd stopped counting. "Well, well," Vex said, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "Captain Park Ji-hoon of the cargo hauler Lucky Star, you've been harboring my property." "Your property is probably in the cargo hold," Ji-hoon replied, keeping his voice steady. "I've got medical supplies, some electronics, and a case of expired protein bars. Take your pick," Vex laughed, showing teeth that had been replaced with metal implants. "Don't play stupid with me, boy. You've got the Ice Princess on board, and she's got something that belongs to me." "I don't belong to anyone," Nayon said, stepping into view of the camera. Her voice was calm, but Ji-hoon could see her hands shaking slightly. "There she is!" Vex's grin widened. "Thought you were clever, didn't you, sweetheart? Escaping in that little life pod, making us chase you across 3 systems, but you can't hide from quantum tracking forever." "What do you want?" Ji-hoon asked, though he already knew the answer. "Simple trade," Vex said. "The alien and her data crystal for your life. I don't have any beef with you, Captain. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hand her over, and you can fly away with all your parts still attached." Ji-hoon glanced at the tactical display. The raiders were 8 minutes out now, close enough that he could see the weapon ports opening on their hulls. Each of those ships carried enough firepower to turn the Lucky Star into space dust without breaking a sweat. "And if I refuse?" he asked. "Then you die," Vex said simply. "Along with your ship, your cargo, and any chance of that data reaching the Ice People's fleet. At least if you hand her over, some good comes out of this mess. I'm not unreasonable." "You destroyed her transport and killed her escort," Ji-hoon said. "That sounds pretty unreasonable to me. Business is business. They fought back, so they died. Simple as that." Vex leaned forward, his scarred face filling the screen. "But you're just a cargo hauler who got mixed up in something bigger than him. I'm offering you a way out. Take it." Nayon moved closer to Ji-hoon, her voice low enough that the raiders couldn't hear. "You should accept his offer." "What?" Ji-hoon stared at her in disbelief. "He's right. This is bigger than you. You didn't sign up for a war, and you don't deserve to die for my people's problems." Her star-filled eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I can't let you sacrifice yourself for someone you've known for 3 days. 6 minutes to weapons range," the computer announced. On the screen, Vex was checking something off camera, probably his own tactical display. "Time's running out, Captain. My boys are getting trigger-happy, and I'd hate for this to get messy." Ji-hoon looked at the 3 raider ships closing in like wolves around a wounded deer. His ship had basic shields and exactly one defensive laser. That was designed more for clearing space debris than fighting military-grade assault craft. In a straight fight, he'd last maybe 30 seconds. But as he looked at Nayon, at the quiet dignity with which she was preparing to sacrifice herself for his safety, something hardened in his chest. This wasn't just about one alien woman anymore. This was about 47,000 people who were depending on the data she carried. People who'd been searching for a home for 3 generations. Captain Park, Vex said, his patience clearly running thin. I need an answer now. Jihoon took a deep breath and looked straight into the camera. Here's my answer, he said. Go to hell. He cut the transmission before Vex could respond and spun toward his navigation console. Computer, full power to... Engines, and I mean everything we've got. Jihoon, no, Nayon grabbed his arm. They'll kill you. Maybe, he said, his hands flying over the controls as he plotted a course toward the nearest asteroid field. But I'd rather die trying than live knowing I handed you over to those bastards. The Lucky Star's engines roared to life, pushing the old freighter faster than she'd moved in years. Behind them, the 3 raider ships adjusted their course to match, their superior speed letting them close the gap despite Jihoon's head start. 4 minutes to weapons range, the computer said, still sounding annoyingly cheerful about their impending doom. Not if I can help it, Jihoon muttered, pushing. His ship's engines passed their safety limits. The whole ship shook as they accelerated, warning lights flashing across every console. Nayon strapped herself into the co-pilot's seat, her face pale but determined. If we're going to do this, she said, tell me how I can help. Jihoon grinned, despite their desperate situation. Hold on tight, he said. This is going to get interesting. The Lucky Star screamed through space like her hull was on fire, which wasn't far from the truth. Jihoon had pushed the engines so far past their safety limits that the temperature gauges were flashing red warnings every few seconds. The whole ship vibrated like a tuning fork, rivets creaking and metal plates groaning under the strain. 3 minutes to weapons range, the computer announced. Though it didn't sound quite as cheerful anymore, even the AI seemed to understand. They were in serious trouble. Jihoon's eyes swept across his navigation display, looking for anything that might give them an edge. The raiders were gaining fast, their military-grade engines easily outpacing his old cargo hauler. In 2 minutes, maybe less, they'd be close enough to start shooting, and once that happened, it would all be over. Then he saw it. Off to starboard, barely visible against the starfield, was something that made him smile for the first time since the pirates had appeared on his sensors. There, he said, pointing at a dark patch of space that seemed to swallow light. That's our way out. Nayon followed his gaze, her enhanced vision picking out details his human eyes missed. That's the Kronos field, she said, her voice tight with concern. It's a graveyard of dead ships and broken asteroids. The radiation from that dying star makes it almost impossible to navigate. Almost impossible, Jihoon agreed, his hands already working the navigation controls. But not completely impossible, not if you know what you're doing. The Kronos field stretched across several thousand kilometers of space, a maze of floating debris and electromagnetic interference that had claimed dozens of ships over the years. At its heart was a red giant star in its final death throes, pumping out waves of radiation that could fry electronics and cook a ship's crew if they got too close. Most sane pilots gave the field a wide berth, but Jihoon had hauled cargo through worse places, and he knew something about the field that the pirates probably didn't. The radiation came in pulses, following a pattern that could be predicted if you knew what to look for. You're insane, Nayon said, as the Lucky Star changed course toward the debris field. Even if we survive the radiation, there are pieces of metal the size of buildings floating around in there. One collision, and we're dead. Better than being shot to pieces by pirates, Jihoon replied, watching his instruments as they approached. The field's edge. Besides, those raiders have fancy targeting computers and advanced sensors. All that high-tech equipment is going to be useless once we're inside that radiation storm. Behind them, the 3 pirate ships adjusted their course to follow. Jihoon could see weapon ports opening on their hulls, energy signatures building. As they prepared to fire, they were still just outside effective range, but not for much longer. 2 minutes, the computer said. Not if I can help it, Jihoon muttered, diving toward the first cluster of asteroids. The moment they entered the field, every screen on the lucky star flickered and distorted. Static filled the communication channels, and the navigation computers started giving conflicting readings. But Jihoon had flown through electromagnetic storms before, and he knew how to read the subtle changes in his ship's behavior that told him which way was safe. "Stay close to the big asteroids," he told Nayeon, weaving between chunks of rock that were easily twice the size of his ship. "The metal content will give us some shielding from the worst of the radiation." The first wave of energy from the dying star washed over them, making every light on the ship flicker. Nayeon gasped as the temperature dropped suddenly, her breath visible in the suddenly cold air. The ship's heating system had shut down automatically to protect itself from the electromagnetic pulse. "Are you okay?" Jihoon asked, worried about how the radiation might affect her alien physiology. "I'm fine," she said, though she was shivering again. "Kirathi are more resistant to radiation than most species, but your ship—" "The Lucky Star's tough," Jihoon said, though he was watching the system diagnostics with growing concern. Half his sensors were offline, and the navigation computer was struggling to maintain a fix on their position. "She's been through worse than this." Behind them, the 3 raider ships had followed them into the field, but they were already having problems. Their sophisticated targeting systems, designed to lock onto targets at extreme range, were completely useless in the electromagnetic chaos. Jihoon could see them on his basic proximity sensors, weaving erratically as their pilots struggled with malfunctioning instruments. "Look at that," he said with satisfaction, watching one of the raiders nearly collide with a spinning chunk of debris. "All that fancy equipment isn't doing them much good now." The second radiation pulse hit harder than the first. Every screen on the Lucky Star went dark for a moment before flickering back to life. But when they came back online, half the displays were showing garbage data. The navigation computer finally gave up completely, leaving Jihoon to fly by instinct, and the few instruments that were still working. "How can you navigate without computers?" Nayeon asked, watching him pilot the ship through the maze of floating metal, using nothing but basic proximity sensors and his own judgment. "Practice," Jihoon said, threading the needle between 2 massive asteroid fragments. "Computers are great when they work, but they're not everything. Sometimes you have to trust your gut." One of the raider ships wasn't adapting as well. Its pilot, probably used to relying on automated systems, misjudged the distance to a large asteroid and scraped along its surface. Sparks flew from damaged hull plating, and the ship's trajectory became even more erratic. "Their targeting computers are completely scrambled," Nayeon observed, watching the raiders' futile attempts to get a weapons lock. "They can barely see us, let alone shoot at us." "That's the idea," Jihoon said, diving deeper into the field. The radiation was getting stronger now, powerful enough that he could feel it making his skin tingle. But his ship's basic systems, built with old-fashioned reliability in mind, were still functioning. The raiders' high-tech equipment was failing piece by piece. A third pulse of radiation, stronger than the others, swept through the field. This time, one of the raider ships wasn't so lucky. Its main computer core, overloaded by the electromagnetic interference, shut down completely. The ship went dark, drifting helplessly as its pilot struggled to restart critical systems. "One down," Jihoon said grimly. 2 to go. But the remaining raiders were learning. Instead of trying to use their damaged targeting systems, they were firing wildly into the asteroid field, hoping to hit the Lucky Star by chance. Energy bolts flashed past the cargo hauler's hull, some coming close enough to make the shields flicker. "They're getting desperate," Nayeon said. "Good," Jihoon replied, plotting a course toward the heart of the field where the radiation was strongest. "Desperate people make mistakes." As if to prove his point, one of the raiders fired a spread of missiles into the debris field. But without proper targeting data, the missiles locked onto the nearest large metal signature, which happened to be a massive chunk of twisted hull plating from some long-dead battleship. The missiles detonated harmlessly against the debris, their explosions briefly lighting up the dark field like fireworks. "Computer," Jihoon called out, hoping the AI was still functional. "How much deeper does this field extend?" "Unable to determine," came the staticky reply. "Navigation sensors offline. Recommend immediate withdrawal from hazardous area. Not happening, Jihoon said, diving toward a cluster of asteroids that looked like they'd been welded together by some cosmic accident. We're going all the way to the center. The heart of the Kronos field was like flying through the belly of some massive, dead beast. Chunks of metal the size of city blocks drifted in slow, deadly orbits around each other, while smaller debris created a constantly shifting maze of hazards. The radiation here was so intense that Jihoon could taste copper in his mouth, and the Lucky Star's hull was actually glowing faintly from the electromagnetic bombardment. But this was exactly where he wanted to be. "Stay close to me," he told Nayeon, weaving between two massive pieces of what looked like an old space station. This is where it gets interesting. The two remaining raider ships were still following, but they were struggling badly now. Their sensors were almost completely blind, reduced to basic proximity detection that only worked at close range. Jihoon could see them on his own short-range scanners, moving cautiously through the debris field, like hunters who'd suddenly realized they were the ones being hunted. "There," he said, spotting what he was looking for. A cluster of asteroids had formed a rough circle, creating a natural arena about 2 kilometers across, perfect for what he had in mind. He guided the Lucky Star into the center of the space, and then did something that made Nayeon grab her armrests in alarm. He shut down the engines completely. "What are you doing?" she asked, watching their ship drift silently among the asteroids. "Hiding in plain sight," Jihoon said, his fingers dancing over the controls. He shut down every non-essential system, reducing their energy signature to almost nothing. In all this radiation and debris, we're just another piece of floating metal. The first raider ship entered their little arena moments later, its pilot clearly frustrated and half-blind. The ship moved slowly, sensors sweeping back and forth as it searched for any sign of the cargo hauler. It passed within 100 meters of the Lucky Star without detecting them. Jihoon waited until the raider was at the far end of the arena, then quietly restarted his engines at minimum power. Moving like a ghost, he positioned himself behind one of the larger asteroids and did something that would have made any sane pilot question his sanity. He vented his ship's coolant system directly into space. The supercooled liquid created an instant cloud of frozen particles that reflected the asteroid field's ambient radiation in a very specific way. To the raider's struggling sensors, it looked exactly like an engine signature trying to hide behind the asteroid. The pirate ship took the bait immediately, swinging around to investigate the false signal. As it moved into position, Jihoon fired up his engines and came around the other side of the asteroid, putting the massive rock between himself and the raider. "What are you planning?" Nayeon whispered, watching the tactical display with growing amazement. "Watch and learn," Jihoon said, timing his next move perfectly. Just as the raider realized the engine signature was fake, Jihoon used his ship's maneuvering thrusters to nudge a smaller asteroid directly into the pirate's path. The raider pilot, already confused and flying half-blind, didn't see the chunk of rock until it was too late. The collision wasn't enough to destroy the ship, but it definitely wasn't gentle. The raider's hull buckled and its starboard engine went dark. Atmosphere vented from several breaches, and the ship's erratic movement suggested serious damage to its flight controls. "One more down," Jihoon said with satisfaction, watching the crippled raider drift away into the debris field. "Now for the hard one." The last pirate ship was Captain Vex's flagship, and its pilot was clearly more experienced than the others. Instead of blundering around the asteroid field, it had taken position at the edge of the arena and was waiting, using its remaining sensors to watch for any movement. "He's being smart," Nayeon observed, "waiting for us to make the first move." "Then we'll give him what he wants," Jihoon said, but not in the way she expected. Instead of trying to sneak around, he fired up the Lucky Star's engines to full power and charged straight at the raider, weaving between asteroids like a madman. To any observer, it looked like a desperate suicidal attack. The raider took the bait, powering up its weapons and moving to intercept. But just as the two ships were about to meet head-on, Jihoon did something that made Nayeon's breath catch in her throat. He killed his engines and used his maneuvering thrusters to flip the Lucky Star completely around, so it was flying backward while maintaining its forward momentum. Then he fired every thruster he had in the opposite direction, killing his velocity so suddenly that the laws of physics seemed to hiccup. The raider shot past him, its pilot completely unprepared for such an insane maneuver. For a moment, both ships were motionless relative to each other, and Ji-hoon had a perfect shot at the pirate's unshielded rear section. But instead of firing his single defensive laser, he did something even more unexpected. He opened his cargo bay doors and ejected a container of medical supplies directly at the raider's engine intake. The container, designed to survive atmospheric entry, punched through the raider's engine housing like a bullet through paper. The Sioux pirate ship's main drive exploded in a cascade of sparks and debris, leaving it dead in space. "Impossible," Nayeon breathed, staring at the drifting raider ship. "You just defeated 3 military-grade assault ships with a cargo hauler and medical supplies." Ji-hoon was already plotting a course out of the asteroid field, but he took a moment to look back at the disabled pirate ships. Sometimes the best weapon is the one nobody expects you to use. As they made their way back toward clear space, Nayeon couldn't stop staring at him. "My people pride themselves on advanced technology, on sophisticated tactics and superior equipment, but I have never seen anything like what you just did." "It's not about having the best gear," Ji-hoon said, carefully navigating between the larger asteroids as they headed for the field's edge. "It's about using what you have in ways nobody else would think of. The Kirathi Military Academy teaches 17 different combat formations," she said quietly. "Hundreds of tactical scenarios, thousands of strategic combinations, but none of them would have thought to use medical supplies as ammunition." Ji-hoon grinned, feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. "That's because your people think like soldiers. I think like a cargo hauler who's had to improvise his way out of trouble more times than he can count." They cleared the radiation field. An hour later, the Lucky Star's systems gradually coming back online as they moved into cleaner space. Behind them, the Kronos field looked peaceful and empty, giving no sign of the battle that had just taken place in its depths. "The other raiders will eventually get their ships running again," Nayeon said, watching the field shrink behind them. "They'll come after us." "Maybe," Ji-hoon agreed, "but not any time soon, and by then, we'll be long gone." She turned to look at him, those star-filled eyes bright with something that might have been admiration. "You realize what you've done, don't you? You've just proven that human creativity and determination can overcome technological superiority. My people will find that very difficult to believe." "Then maybe it's time they learned something new," Ji-hoon said, setting course for the outer rim where Nayeon's people were waiting. The Lucky Star drifted in the quiet space beyond the Kronos field, her hull still glowing faintly from the radiation exposure. Warning lights blinked across every console, and the ship's computer was running diagnostics that would probably take hours to complete. But they were alive, and the pirates were nowhere to be seen. Ji-hoon slumped back in his pilot's chair, exhaustion hitting him like a physical weight. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his hands were shaking from adrenaline, and every muscle in his body ached from the stress of the past few hours. But when he looked over at Nayeon, he found her staring at him with an expression he'd never seen before. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Do I have something on my face?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she got up from her seat and moved to the main viewport, looking back toward the asteroid field where 3 military-grade assault ships were now drifting helplessly among the debris. "In all the histories of my people," she said finally, her voice quiet and thoughtful, "there are no records of a single cargo ship defeating 3 warships in combat. It should not have been possible." Ji-hoon shrugged, trying to downplay what had just happened. "I got lucky. The radiation field leveled the playing field, and those pirates weren't used to flying blind." "Luck?" Nayeon turned to face him, those star-filled eyes intense. "Is that what you call using medical supplies as ammunition? Or timing asteroid impacts to disable enemy ships? Or performing a reverse thrust maneuver that should have torn your ship apart?" "Just problem-solving," he said, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "When you're a cargo hauler, you learn to make do with what you've got." She was quiet for a long moment, processing something that seemed to be turning her entire world-view upside down. "My people have a phrase," she said finally. "Kithara nos velen. The ice remembers all patterns. It means that everything follows predictable rules, that superior knowledge and technology will always triumph over chaos and improvisation. Sounds reasonable, Ji-hoon said, though he was already getting up to check the damage reports flooding his screen. It is the foundation of Kirathi philosophy, she continued. We believe that advancement comes through perfecting established methods, through building upon the knowledge of our ancestors. We study, we calculate, we plan. She gestured toward the asteroid field. But what you did back there, it followed no pattern we would recognize. Ji-hoon pulled up the ship's diagnostic display, wincing at the list of systems that needed repair or replacement. The radiation exposure had fried half his circuits, the engines were running at 60% efficiency, and the hull had microfractures in at least a dozen places. Hand me that repair kit, he said, pointing to a toolbox mounted on the wall. We need to get the primary sensors back online before we run into anything else. But instead of helping with the repairs, Nayeon continued to watch him with that intense analytical expression. Do you know what our military commanders would have done in your situation? Probably something smarter than what I did, Ji-hoon said, pulling out a circuit tester and getting to work on the sensor array. They would have calculated the odds, she said. Determined that victory was impossible. Then they would have either retreated or surrendered, choosing the option that preserved the most resources for future battles. Ji-hoon paused in his work, looking up at her. And you think that would have been the smart thing to do? I thought so until an hour ago. She moved closer, watching him work with fascination. But you didn't calculate odds. You didn't weigh costs and benefits. You simply refused to accept defeat and then found a way to make victory possible. Victory, Ji-hoon laughed, gesturing at the damage report still scrolling across his screen. Look at my ship. I'm going to be making repairs for weeks, assuming I can even find replacement parts for some of this stuff. Your ship is damaged but functional, she pointed out. 3 pirate vessels are disabled and no longer a threat. My people's data is safe. By any reasonable measure, that is victory. He went back to work on the sensors, but he could feel her watching his every move. It was unsettling, like being studied by a scientist who'd discovered a new species. My grandmother, Nayeon said suddenly, was chief engineer on the first Kirathi colony ship. She designed systems so perfect, so precisely calculated, that they ran for 30 years without a single malfunction. That's impressive, Ji-hoon said, though he was only half listening as he traced a burned circuit. Yes, it was. But when pirates attacked that ship 5 years ago, all of her perfect systems were useless. The pirates had newer technology, better weapons. The colony ship was captured because our people couldn't adapt to an unexpected situation. That got Ji-hoon's attention. He looked up from his work, seeing pain in her expression. What happened to the colonists? They were sold as slaves, she said quietly. 3,000 Kirathi, including my grandmother, disappeared into the black markets of the Outer Rim. We never saw them again. I'm sorry, Ji-hoon said, and meant it. After that, our military leaders studied the attack extensively. They identified every mistake, calculated better defensive formations, designed superior weapons. But they never asked the most important question, which was, how could 3,000 people be defeated by 30 pirates? She sat down across from him, her silver skin reflecting the light from his repair tools. The answer is that our people had forgotten how to improvise, how to think beyond their training, how to turn disadvantages into advantages. Ji-hoon set down his tools, giving her his full attention. And you think humans are better at that? I think, she said carefully, that humans haven't lost something my people gave up long ago, the willingness to try impossible things just because they might work. She was quiet for a moment, then continued. Our children are taught from birth that there is a correct way to do everything. That deviation from proven methods leads to failure, but you... She shook her head in amazement. You saw 3 superior ships and decided to fight them anyway, not because you calculated victory was possible, but because surrender was unacceptable. Somebody had to, Ji-hoon said simply. Yes, she agreed. Somebody had to, but a Kirathi, in your position, would have seen only the logical choice. Preserve the ship and crew by surrendering the data. It would have been the rational decision, And your people would still be without a home. Exactly. She leaned forward, her voice becoming more animated. That is what my people have lost. The understanding that sometimes the irrational choice is the right choice, that sometimes you have to risk everything for a chance at something better. Jihoon picked up his tools again, but he was thinking about what she'd said. So, what happens now? You go back to your people and tell them they need to be more like humans. I don't know, she admitted. The Kirathi Council values tradition and proven methods. They may not want to hear that a primitive species has something to teach us. Their loss, Jihoon said, getting back to work on the sensors. She smiled. At that, the first truly relaxed expression he'd seen from her. Yes, it would be, but perhaps some of us are ready to learn new patterns. The Kirathi fleet stretched across space like a frozen constellation, hundreds of ships arranged in precise formations that had been maintained for 3 generations. Each vessel was a masterpiece of ice-blue metal and crystal, their hulls glowing, with the same inner light that marked Neon's people. But despite their beauty, there was something sad about the fleet, something that spoke of endless wandering and hope deferred too long. Jihoon's battered Lucky Star looked like a rust bucket next to the elegant Kirathi vessels, but he didn't care. After 2 weeks of repairs and careful navigation, they'd finally reached the refugee fleet at the coordinates Neon had provided. The data crystal she carried would either give her people a new home or confirm that their search would continue for another generation. They're beautiful, he said, watching the fleet's graceful movements through the viewport. Each ship moved in perfect harmony with the others, like dancers performing a ballet written in starlight and metal. They're dying, Neon said quietly, her breath fogging in the cold air of the cabin. She'd kept the temperature low during their journey, and Jihoon had gotten used to wearing extra layers. 3 generations in space, Captain. Children who have never walked on solid ground. Elders who barely remember what it felt like to have sky above their heads instead of metal. A communication signal chimed, and the main screen lit up with the image of an elderly Kirathi woman. Her silver hair was arranged in elaborate braids that spoke of high rank, and her star-filled eyes held the weight of decades spent leading desperate people through the void. "Neon, daughter of ice," the woman said, her voice carrying both relief and reproach. "You have been missing for many days. The council feared you were lost." "I nearly was, High Counselor Yerim," Neon replied, bowing her head respectfully. "But I carry the data we have sought. 17 worlds, each suitable for our needs." The old woman's eyes widened, hope flickering across her features like sunrise on frozen lakes. But then her gaze shifted to Jihoon, and her expression hardened. "And who is this human who shares your ship?" she asked, her tone suggesting she'd tasted something unpleasanter. "This is Captain Park Jihoon," Neon said, her voice firm despite the obvious disapproval from her superior. "He saved my life when pirates destroyed my transport. Without his help, the data would now be in enemy hands." High Counselor Yerim studied Jihoon with the kind of scrutiny usually reserved for insects under a microscope. "A human," she said, as if the word itself was distasteful. "Neon, you know our laws about contact with lesser species. They are not to be trusted with our secrets." "With respect, High Counselor," Jihoon said, keeping his voice level despite the insult. "Your lesser species just spent 2 weeks keeping your daughter alive and fighting off pirates to protect your people's future." The old woman's eyes flashed with anger. "You dare speak to the High Council with such insolence? Guards, remove this— Stop!" Neon's voice cut through the transmission like a blade of ice. "If you wish to judge Captain Jihoon, then judge him by his actions, not by his species. He faced 3 military assault ships with nothing but a cargo hauler and his own courage. He risked his life for people he had never met, asking nothing in return." "Impossible," another voice said from off-screen. "Human vessels are primitive. Their tactics are chaotic and inefficient." "Then explain how he defeated Captain Vex and his raiders," Neon challenged. "Explain how he outmaneuvered ships with superior speed and firepower using nothing but determination and creative thinking." A murmur ran through whatever assembly was watching the transmission. The name Captain Vex clearly meant something to these people, and not something good. High Counselor Yerim leaned forward, her expression shifting from dismissal to genuine interest. "You speak of the pirate who destroyed the colony ship Winterheart." "The same," Nayon confirmed. "Captain Ji-hoon not only defeated him but disabled his entire raiding fleet. The threat that has plagued our people for years is ended." The silence that followed was profound. Ji-hoon could almost hear the recalculation happening in alien minds, prejudices being weighed against undeniable facts. "Perhaps," the High Counselor said slowly, "we have been too hasty in our judgment. Captain Ji-hoon, you will be our honored guest while we examine the data Nayon carries. If it proves genuine, it's genuine," Ji-hoon said, "and your daughter nearly died getting it to you. Maybe instead of questioning her choices, you should be thanking her for her dedication." Another long silence. Then, unexpectedly, the old woman smiled. "You speak with the bluntness of melting ice, human. Very well. You are invited to witness the Council's evaluation of this data. If it truly leads us to a new home, the Karathi people will be in your debt." 3 days later, Ji-hoon stood on the observation deck of the Karathi flagship, watching survey ships return from the nearest candidate world. The planet below was a sphere of white and blue, its frozen oceans and ice-capped continents perfect for a species that had evolved in eternal winter. "The atmospheric readings are perfect," Nayon said, reading from a datapad. "Gravity within acceptable range, no hostile life forms, and enough geothermal activity to support our cities." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with tears of joy. "My people have found their home." Around them, the Karathi fleet was already beginning to organize itself for the massive undertaking of planetary colonization. Ships that had wandered the void for decades were finally preparing to land, to put down roots in soil that their children would call their own. "The Council wants to offer you a position," Nayon said. "Chief Advisor on Human Relations, with a permanent home on the New World. They're calling you the Bridge Builder, the first human to earn true respect from the Karathi." Ji-hoon considered the offer, watching shuttles ferry excited colonists down to the planet's surface. It was a generous proposal, more than he'd ever expected from a species that had considered humans beneath notice just days ago. "What about you?" he asked. "Are you staying with your people?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching her people's ships descend toward their new home like silver snow falling in reverse. "I should," she said finally. "It's my duty, my place in the pattern of our society. But I keep thinking about what you said, about how sometimes the irrational choice is the right choice." She turned to face him, and he saw something in her expression that made his heart skip. "My people will build their new cities according to ancient designs, following traditions that are thousands of years old. They will create something beautiful and perfect and completely predictable. And that's bad because there are 47 other species in this galaxy who are still searching for homes," she said. "Refugees and wanderers and lost souls who need someone to help them find their way, someone who understands both the value of tradition and the necessity of change." Ji-hoon felt a smile spreading across his face. "You want to come with me, back to a life of dodging pirates and eating bad food in spaceport diners?" "I want to learn," she said simply. "From you, from other species, from the galaxy itself. The Karathi have spent so long looking inward that we've forgotten there's a whole universe out there full of people who need help. The Council won't like it." "The Council will adapt," she said with a confidence that reminded him of her fierce determination in the face of impossible odds. After all, a human just taught them that some battles are worth fighting even when victory seems impossible. 6 months later, the Lucky Star drifted through space with a new coat of paint and a second pilot's chair installed in the cockpit. Her cargo hold carried supplies for a colony of displaced Viridians, while her crew of 2 worked together with the kind of partnership that comes from shared danger and mutual respect. "Next stop, the Helix Nebula," Ji-hoon announced, checking their navigation display. "The Viridian elders think there might be suitable worlds in the outer systems." "And after that?" Nayon asked, her silver skin glowing softly in the starlight. "After that, we keep flying," he said. "Keep helping. Keep building bridges between species that have forgotten how to trust each other." She smiled, settling back in her chair as the Lucky Star jumped to hyperspace. "I like the sound of that." Outside, the viewport. Stars stretched into lines of light, carrying them toward new adventures and unknown challenges. But inside the ship, two unlikely partners had found something rare in the cold depths of space, proof that understanding and cooperation could flourish even between the most different of species. The galaxy was vast and often dangerous, full of pirates and prejudice and people who had lost hope. But it was also full of possibility, of second chances and new beginnings. And somewhere in that immensity, a human cargo hauler and a Karathi refugee were proving that sometimes the best things in life come not from careful planning, but from the simple decision to help someone in need.